4 times. 4 separate strikes on Jerusalem's power grid in a single month. And the city that the world watches more closely than almost any other on Earth is now learning what it means to go dark. Not partially dark, not a rolling outage in a distant neighborhood. Dark in ways that have forced hospitals onto backup generators, shut down traffic systems across major arterial roads, and left millions of residents staring at blackened skylines where floodlit holy sites once burned through the night. This is not an accident. This is not infrastructure decay. This is a coordinated campaign targeting the nervous system of a modern city, and the weapon being used to do it is something that the most expensive air defense architecture in the world has repeatedly failed to stop. Welcome to Legal Lens USA. I am your host, David Reynolds, and what you are about to hear over the next 12 minutes will fundamentally change how you understand the current state of the Middle East conflict, the actual capabilities of Iranian drone technology, and why the story you are being told by mainstream networks is missing the most important chapter. Before we go any further, if you are new here, hit that subscribe button and click the like button right now, because we cover developments like this before anyone else does, and we break them down in a way that actually makes sense. This community has become one of the sharpest geopolitical audiences on this platform, and today we are going to give you analysis that no primetime broadcast is going to touch. Jerusalem sits at an elevation of roughly 800 meters above sea level, built across a series of ridgelines and valleys that have been contested, conquered, divided, and reunified across 3,000 years of recorded human conflict. Today, that ancient geography is relevant again, but not for the reasons that fill history textbooks. The city's power infrastructure, the transmission lines, substations, and distribution nodes that keep 900,000 people connected to the modern world, was built across those ridgelines over decades, expanded during periods of relative quiet, reinforced after previous conflicts, and integrated into a regional grid that stretches far beyond the city limits into the broader Israeli electrical network. Engineers and city planners designed that system with redundancy. They built backup pathways. They mapped out contingency routing. What they did not design for, what nobody designing civilian infrastructure in any city on Earth fully designed for, was a sustained campaign by precision-guided loitering munitions, willing to strike the same grid 4 times in 30 days. According to Iranian sources and reports circulating through regional media, the strikes on Jerusalem's power infrastructure represent a deliberate escalation in targeting doctrine, moving from military assets and command facilities toward the civilian and semi-civilian systems that sustain a modern city's operational capacity. The reports describe coordinated drone launches involving multiple aircraft operating in waves, with some units designated to probe and exhaust interception capacity, while others maintain targeting approach toward designated infrastructure nodes. The coordination, according to these reports, reflects planning cycles measured in weeks rather than hours, with target selection based on detailed analysis of which substations and transmission points would produce cascading failures across the broadest possible service area. The drone at the center of these strikes, the platform that Iranian sources claim is responsible for the repeated penetration of Jerusalem's air defense perimeter, belongs to the Shahed family of loitering munitions, specifically advanced variants that have undergone significant development since the platform first appeared in regional conflict reporting. The basic Shahed architecture that most Western audiences became familiar with through early conflict reporting described a relatively simple system. A delta-wing airframe, a small piston engine producing a distinctive sound that Ukrainian defenders began calling the moped, a basic navigation system, and a warhead designed for terminal impact. That description was accurate when it was written. It is no longer adequate. What Iranian engineers have done to the Shahed platform in the period since that initial reporting is what makes the current situation in Jerusalem so strategically significant. The navigation architecture has been substantially upgraded. Early variants relied primarily on GPS guidance, which created vulnerability to jamming systems that both Ukrainian and Israeli defense teams deployed with varying degrees of success. According to defense analysts who have examined recovered components from more recent strikes, the newer variants incorporate inertial navigation backup systems, terrain-following radar altimetry, and in some configurations, optical terminal guidance that allows the drone to identify and home in on specific visual signatures in the final approach phase. What this means in practical terms is that jamming the GPS signal, which was once a reliable method of sending these drones off course, now represents only one layer of a more complex guidance problem. Disable the GPS, and the inertial navigation keeps the platform roughly on course. Disable the inertial navigation, and in some variants, the optical system takes over in the final kilometers. You are no longer dealing with a weapon that goes blind when you jam one frequency. You are dealing with a system that was specifically engineered to remain functional after losing its primary navigation input. The propulsion upgrades are equally significant. The original engine produced a sound profile that trained listeners could identify at considerable distance, providing early warning to defense teams. Newer variants have incorporated engine modifications that reduce acoustic signature, operate at different RPM profiles that change the auditory footprint, and in some configurations use different fuel mixtures that alter both sound and thermal emissions. The platform that defenders learned to hear is no longer exactly the platform being launched. Every adaptation the defense community identified and prepared for has generated a corresponding adaptation in the offensive system. This is not coincidence. This is an engineering competition being conducted in near real time. If you are watching this and understanding what this means for every city in the region that depends on similar infrastructure, for every nation whose strategic calculus is built on the assumption that drone swarms can be adequately intercepted, then share this video right now and hit the like button. Help more people understand what is actually happening, because the implications extend far beyond Jerusalem. The evidence supporting the Iranian sourcing of these strikes comes from multiple directions that, taken together, paint a picture that is difficult to dismiss through any single alternative explanation. Iranian military officials have issued statements acknowledging the strikes, providing operational framing that positions the infrastructure targeting as a calculated response to Israeli strikes on Iranian territory. Regional media outlets, including networks with independent reporting infrastructure in the area, have provided corroborating coverage of the outages themselves, with footage showing darkened city districts, emergency response activation, and the visible aftermath of substation damage at multiple locations. Satellite imagery analyzed by open-source intelligence observers has identified thermal signatures and structural damage at locations consistent with reported strike coordinates. What elevates this evidence package beyond the standard claim and counterclaim dynamic of conflict reporting is the validation arriving from sources with no incentive to amplify Iranian capability claims. Israeli grid management officials, speaking through official channels in the immediate aftermath of the third and fourth strikes, used language that acknowledged not just the fact of the outages, but the systematic nature of the targeting. The characterization of the strikes as coordinated and precise, offered by infrastructure management sources rather than military officials, carries particular weight precisely because these are not voices that benefit from validating the effectiveness of Iranian operations against Israeli systems. Perhaps most revealing is the technical assessment emerging from Israeli defense industry circles regarding the upgrade trajectory of the platforms involved. According to reporting in Western defense publications, Israeli interception teams have documented a measurable increase in the percentage of incoming drones that are requiring engagement by multiple interceptor systems, rather than single intercept solutions. In the early phases of drone conflict, a single interceptor missile reliably neutralized incoming Shaheds. The newer variants are absorbing hits in ways that suggest hardened electronics or redundant control surfaces, requiring follow-up engagement to complete the kill. When a defensive system that was designed around specific engagement mathematics begins encountering a target that breaks those mathematics, the operational problem compounds with every launch. Let that sink in for a moment. The interceptor missiles being fired to protect Jerusalem are not cheap. Individual units from Iron Dome's to mere interceptor inventory carry price tags in the range of $40,000 to $50,000 per missile. The drones being intercepted cost a fraction of that. When multiple interceptors are required per drone, and when drones are being launched in coordinated waves designed to saturate available interception capacity, the economic equation of this conflict becomes deeply unfavorable for the defending side. This is a dynamic that every defense ministry watching this conflict is now actively modeling, because the implications for their own air defense inventories are direct and immediate. The strategic consequences of 4 successful infrastructure strikes on Jerusalem in a single month cascade outward in directions that extend well beyond the immediate tactical situation. The first consequence is doctrinal. Israeli military planning has operated for decades on an assumption that urban infrastructure in the Israeli heartland, particularly infrastructure serving Jerusalem, sits behind such dense and layered air defense coverage that sustained infrastructure targeting campaigns were simply not viable options for adversaries. That assumption is now empirically disproven. You cannot rebuild a doctrinal framework overnight. The planning cycles required to fundamentally revise force protection doctrine for civilian infrastructure, to identify new interception approaches, to procure and deploy whatever systems might fill the gaps that have been exposed. These cycles are measured in years. In the meantime, the infrastructure remains vulnerable. The second consequence is psychological. And in conflicts that extend over months and years, the psychological dimension ultimately shapes political outcomes as much as any tactical development. Jerusalem is not a peripheral city that residents and observers can mentally bracket as an acceptable sacrifice zone during periods of elevated conflict. It is the city that carries the heaviest symbolic weight in the regional equation, contested, sacred, administratively unified, but politically unresolved in ways that make every development there reverberate through the political frameworks of multiple nations and religious communities simultaneously. When the lights go out in Jerusalem, repeatedly, when hospitals activate backup generators because the grid cannot be guaranteed, when traffic systems fail across major intersections, the message being delivered is not primarily technical. It is political. It is a demonstration that no geography is beyond reach, that no symbolic significance confers protection, that the conflict has entered a phase where civilian systems in the most watched city on Earth are contested terrain. The third consequence reaches directly into the American strategic picture. United States military assets and advisory personnel operating in the region exist within the same threat environment that is now producing repeated infrastructure strikes on Jerusalem. American bases in the region, the facilities in Qatar, Bahrain, and Kuwait that serve as operational hubs for American force projection across the Middle East, operate with power infrastructure that is fundamentally comparable in its vulnerability profile to what Jerusalem's grid has now demonstrated. If Iranian drone systems can repeatedly penetrate the air defense envelope surrounding one of the most heavily defended urban areas in the world, the calculus protecting American facilities deserves serious reevaluation by every officer and planner responsible for force protection in the theater. It is worth noting that official Israeli and American statements regarding these strikes have followed a pattern that observers of conflict communication will recognize immediately. Israeli authorities have acknowledged the power outages while emphasizing interception successes, providing statistics on drones intercepted, and presenting the strikes that penetrated defenses as anomalies rather than indicators of systematic capability. American officials have offered supportive language regarding Israeli defensive capacities, while stopping short of detailed technical assessment of what the penetration rate actually indicates about the state of interception effectiveness. The conflicting narratives, Iranian claims of coordinated, successful infrastructure targeting alongside official Israeli framing of a largely successful defensive response with limited penetration, create an interpretive space where audiences are forced to evaluate competing accounts against the evidence available independently. The evidence available independently includes the power outages themselves, which are not disputed, the activation of emergency backup systems at medical facilities, which are documented, and the visible damage to substation infrastructure, which satellite imagery has confirmed. When the physical evidence aligns with one set of claims, and the official denial amounts to a characterization of severity rather than a challenge to the basic facts, the interpretive work becomes considerably more straightforward than officials would prefer. What remains genuinely uncertain is the precise operational planning behind the strikes, the specific variant configurations being deployed, and the full scope of what Iranian commanders intend as the campaign's next phase. Whether this infrastructure campaign represents a plateau of Iranian ambition or an early chapter in an escalating sequence remains a question that honest analysis cannot answer definitively from available open-source information. Those genuine uncertainties should be acknowledged. They do not, however, alter the significance of what has already been demonstrated in the skies over Jerusalem 4 times in a single month. So where does this leave us? It leaves us at a moment where the strategic geography of the Middle East is being redrawn, not by armies crossing borders, but by small aircraft crossing defense perimeters, quietly, repeatedly, at a cost ratio that fundamentally favors the attacker. Jerusalem has gone dark 4 times this month. A city of 900,000 people, one of the most symbolically significant and heavily defended urban areas on the planet, has been struck successfully enough times in 30 days to establish a pattern rather than an incident. The Iron Dome intercepted missiles during previous conflict phases. The new threat is different in ways that matter, and in ways that the most expensive air defense systems currently deployed are struggling to address consistently. If this analysis helped you understand what is actually developing in this conflict, please share it with someone who needs to see this, and drop a comment below. Legal Lens USA will continue tracking this story as new information emerges, because this campaign against Jerusalem's infrastructure is not a concluded chapter. This is a story in motion. Do you believe Israel has a credible answer to sustained drone infrastructure campaigns right now? Or has Iranian drone engineering created a gap in defensive doctrine that will take years and billions to close? Let us know in the comments below, because this conversation matters, and your perspective on where this goes next is exactly what this community exists to discuss.